Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hello, people. I have a guest. There were some fireworks outside in this, and now she's kind of scared. It's okay, don't worry. Let's see. Yeah, you're supposed to be asleep. Yeah. Yeah. It's okay. Yeah. Hi, welcome. A little delayed because of this little thingy here. Let's see. Oh, I'm gonna post it on Facebook group real quick. Hey, don't bite my neck. So, as you may have noticed, a lot of the school was cancelled today and probably tomorrow as well because there was a bit of a fire. Hello. It's fine. It's okay. You want to eat my headset? Don't chew on my headset. Is the voice working? Is it coming through? I had to reset the audio output. Oh, let me just switch my Wi-Fi to a faster version. 1 sec. Hey. Yeah. Oh, I'll turn down the music. Better? Hello. My bird's got a bit startled because of the fireworks outside, as he keeps flying up to me and trying to nibble on my headset. So she might interrupt me again at some point, but it seems like she's gonna go to sleep. Oh, it's too soft. It's hard to gauge what the levels are. I can't hear it myself. I'll up it a little bit. Let me know if that's enough. Right. I'll make the window a little bigger. There. Nice clean project. Got directly from the GXPEngine repository. Right. I was thinking, because we're nearing Christmas, I want to do some neat little special effects that you can use to create a Christmassy vibe. Stuff like snowflakes falling or rain, if you want to go for that kind of atmosphere. Does this work? Were anybody's classes cancelled because of the fire? Because I think they're gonna try and fix everything before next year, but there might actually be a chance it won't be done in time. Probably will be done though, but still. Right. So what I'm gonna make is a snowy background, and I'm not 100% sure how I'm gonna do it. I should have prepared a little bit more, but yeah, there was a fire. Yeah, a fire on the 4th floor. I'm not 100% sure what happened. They seem to think that a computer caught fire. It was small, yeah, but you could see it from the outside. In fact, you can see, well, I don't know if you can see it in the background, but you can see suction from my window here. And I could see it from over here. There's like a little orange glow on the 4th floor. Right. I have this snowflake graphic that I made in Photoshop, which is just a blur, a blurry circle, but it'll do. I like to level, or like to layer my levels quite a bit, and because you can do the painter's algorithm thing, meaning that whatever you add first will be further in the background. So if you make a background class and just add that as a child first, you will always have that all the way in the back. So I'll just create it and immediately add it as a child. I hope my Visual Studio won't crash this much anymore. It has been updated, so it shouldn't, but it still might. Well, lucky you, then you didn't miss anything. But if you did have, I think everything in the main building was cancelled, in the G building, and tomorrow everything will be cancelled as well, because they didn't consider it safe enough. If you left anything in school, I think between 10 and 12 you're allowed to go pick it up. If you need something, you'll be guided by the fire department, but other than that, no access to the entire building for a while. Which is pretty severe. Way more hardcore than I thought. I've created a background class. I'm also gonna create a snowflake class. Music okay like this, by the way? I have no way of knowing how loud it actually is because I have a direct input to my headset. Snowflake is going to be a sprite, and it was called snowflake.png, I think, probably not JPEG. Yeah, and the background should just add a bunch of these and not crash. It's starting already. Luckily I've prepared and downloaded Visual Studio Code as well, just in case. No, it's back. Starts at 0, smaller than... started with 20. Did you start crashing on me again? 'Cause I'll replace you like that. You got Visual Studio Code ready to go. That's pretty shitty though. They updated it and they didn't really fix anything. What I'm gonna do is just create a new snowflake 20 times. New snowflake. So the background is just responsible for creating and adding them, but it doesn't place them or anything. I feel like that should be the responsibility of the snowflake itself. Or maybe if you had something like a weather class, which is not uncommon. You often have weather classes if you have multiple things that are influenced by the weather, even like time of day and such. Or if you have wind input, it's good to have a weather class to have the wind blow everything that's under it in a certain direction. Oh, look at that. So let's see. Snowflake is a sprite. It should just fall to the floor a little bit with a certain speed. That speed could be random, or we could scale it a little bit and have that scale determine the falling speed. The smaller the snowflake is, the slower it falls, maybe? I'm not sure if that actually... Yeah, that kind of makes sense, because if it's smaller, it'll look further away anyway. So if we give the scale a random between 0.16 and 0.64, it's pretty small. My internet or your internet? I should do a quick speed test to see if everything is up to snuff. Yeah, I consent. Yeah, it's fast enough, I think. It's a snowflake, right? So it could be slightly see-through. And I don't know if you guys noticed this already, but Sprite has a lot of stuff in it that you can use to alter the way it looks. Its alpha will determine how visible it is, similar to how processing does it. I think 0 is completely invisible, 1 is completely visible. So if we give this a random value between 0.1 and 1, yeah, and we should give it a random position. Hey! My birds are a little panicky because of the fireworks outside. Our x value should be a random between our own width and the game.width plus our own width. So it'll spawn on the screen somewhere, and the y is on the top of the screen. For now, that doesn't matter much. Yeah, let's see how this looks. It's nice. I don't know if you guys can see it, but there's a full screen, or there's like an app with a bunch of snowflakes on the top, but they don't really do anything. That is correct. Slavi, I assume. Yes. Utils is a class that is included in the GXPEngine, and it contains a bunch of handy functions and methods that, like the random that's included in processing and such, it just returns a random number between two numbers. Yeah. It also contains stuff like this, rect overlap, which is very useful. You can try to see if two rectangles overlap, which is a good way to do some quick collision detection. And you can get the frame rate, the current FPS. Alright, so we kind of want to have snowflakes fall gently to the ground. Don't crash again. It's pretty embarrassing for Visual Studio community to be so much worse than the other editors out there. Nothing? Still crashing? Alright, I think it's time for me to switch. It always seems to crash on the autocomplete or something. Oh, great. Visual Studio Code doesn't have support for projects yet. Over time, we want to move downwards a little bit. Our speed could be just something depending on our scale. I mean, our scale is if we're smaller, we should go slower. So maybe we can just do 10 pixels per second times our scale. So if it's 0.16, it'll go a lot slower than normally. I have written a library for that actually, but I'm not using it right now because this is the introductory course. But during physics, you will be using a vector library. Yes, the x and y variables being loose properties instead of one position vector. Oh, look at them go. And they're gone. Nice one shot of snow particles. We should probably include a private method called reset that puts our y's position back up to the top. Minus our own height. And as soon as we're off screen, if our y position is larger than the height of the screen, oh my god. Gonna do some live debugging. Hey, it looks like I'm not the only person having this problem. Larger than the height plus actually the game.height plus our own height. So we're completely off screen. We reset. And we set ourselves back to somewhere in the beginning. Alright, let's see how that looks. Nice. This is already way better, I think. It'll but they all start at the same same position at the top, so it looks kind of weird. But you can see the smaller ones going slower in the background, creating the illusion of depth, which works pretty nice. However, there's snowflakes, and snowflakes don't fall down single file and at continuous speeds. So maybe we can modify our X a little bit as well. For that, I like to use the sine function that's included in all math libraries. But to do that, I have to keep track of how long I've been falling. And I think I can just do that with a float. Total time that I've been falling. So first up, the total time plus equals time dot delta time times 0.001, so divided by 1,000. So total time now contains the amount of seconds that I've been falling. And I think I'll modify my X position by just adding a sine wave of that. Like this. So it should zigzag a little bit. Good evening. You can make it so when they reset, they get a new skill in alpha as well. Yes, that is actually a very good idea. So they don't look like the same pieces falling over and over again. Ah, look at them all synchronously going back and forth. Nice sign waving. That's already better, but we should probably start them off at different times so that they don't all move. Well, you could argue that they're all moving with the same winds if they're running like this. Like they're going back and forth. Yeah, it's true. It does look a little bit like they're falling with the wind. Maybe we can scale the sign with our own scale as well, so the smaller ones move less than the other ones. Ah, too subtle. Instead, I'll change the starting position. So normally the total time will start at 0, but I'll have it start at a random value between 0 and 8 seconds. It loops around anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Could have it start between 0 and 2 pi, but this has a little more randomness to it. Is this everything? Yeah, it is. Now let's see. Ah yeah. Now they're falling more independent from each other. But they're still following quite similar patterns, which makes it look like there is some sort of influence from wind and other inputs, maybe hot air rising up. I think this looks quite realistic already for a simple snow effect. And just introducing a little bit of randomness. But I think it's a good suggestion to have them reset to a new skill in alpha as soon as they reset anyway. But then the speed also has to be reset. So maybe this whole part can go here. And we just call the reset method first before assigning our x value, because our x value is dependent on our own width, and our own width will change depending on our scale. So I think now every time they reset, they'll look different, creating more variety. You won't be able to see the same snowflake pass by a few times. Yeah. It might also be good to have them start at different y positions on the screen. Because now they're all starting at the top and they start falling. And you can see a little bit of a wave pattern, but that'll go away after a few seconds. Yeah, I think this looks pretty realistic, especially now that now that we're resetting them and having them be different every time. You can't really see the pattern. And this is only with a few snowflakes. If we up it a little bit to 200 instead of 20, I think, whoop. Alright, this might be a little too much, but it does look quite snowy. I don't know how well this comes through on the stream. I don't know if this is too much, but it does seem to work quite well. It creates a nice 3D effect, and because the images are slightly blurred and opaque, or the alpha has been fiddled with, you can create a nice sense of depth. I think if I put a sprite behind this, meaning this wouldn't be the background anymore, but still, you could easily think that sprite is further away. And all of that just because I adjust the speed based on the scale, because we automatically assume that objects that are smaller are further away. So the speed of them being larger, the closer they are, kind of makes sense. Looks quite snowy. I'll give them a random Y position as well, so they don't all start out at the top. That looks a bit weird initially. So when they're created, they also assign themselves between height and game.height. Between minus their own height and the game.height plus our own height. So somewhere on the screen within the boundaries. Yeah, now you don't see the first initial wave crashing through. I like how this looks. Usually I cover this stuff during a later lecture of special effects and such, but I feel like it's relevant to Christmas. Yeah. And if we were to up the speed quite significantly and change the scaling a little bit, because now they're scaling uniformly, as in the width scales with the height. But if we just scale the height, they'll become more stretched. And I think we can relatively easily make it look like rain instead of snow. So instead of the scale being uniform like this, we'll wait for the program to stop crashing again. There we go. Set scale XY. The width being relatively small and the height being relatively large. Let's say 4 times. I don't know how this will affect the speeding. Ah, yes. Well, this doesn't look much like rain yet, because they still behave like snowflakes. But if instead of signing them down a little bit, and we up the speed quite significantly, up to maybe 100. Yeah, still not great. Maybe we angle it a little bit. Rotation equals 20 degrees. Something like that. And then instead of just moving over the Y, we use the move. 0 to 0 speed. So that they're automatically moving in the direction they're pointing. Yeah, they're going off screen. But it does work. It does look a lot more like rain. Yeah. Though I do think it's easier to just create a new sprite instead of trying to morph the snowflake into a raindrop. I think a rain sprite would look similar to just a simple stripe, like a white stripe. Alright, let's undo this all. Go back to our Christmassy snowflakes. There we go. Nice 3D effect. So we could even do something like create a layer that's a foreground layer, create a layer that's a background layer, have the foreground layer have bigger snowflakes than the background layer, and then you can have a player sprite somewhere in between those layers, and it'll look even more 3D. First, let me see if I have like a player sprite hanging around somewhere. There we go, my trusty boy. Place him in a debug directory. Create player class. Suing GXPEngine? No. No. No animation, just a normal sprite. Player.png, and we'll have it move around a bit. Input.get key. Key code dot key dot A left. Let's set our speed as well. Float, private, float, underscore speed equals 100 pixels per second. So we'll multiply our speed by the time dot delta time divided by 1000, or the same as multiply.0.001. Which, if I'm going too fast, I can explain what this does. Move only over the X. Same thing for the D. This should be minus speed probably. See if this works. Oh wait, I haven't added it. Whoops. First we add a background, then we add a player. Yeah, there's the boy. But you can see he's on top of everything, because the background layer is added first, and even though the background layer adds its own snowflakes, because they are part of the background layer, they won't go over the player. Which is something good to realize. These two styles do not fit, but you get the idea. Let's finish the WASD movement. For the S key, we'll be moving 0 over the y-axis and speed, not minus speed, over the y-axis. Yeah, 0 over the x-axis, minus over the y-axis. For the D, we'll be going minus our speed over the y-axis as such. I made a mistake. It seems to go sideways. Oh wait, I added D twice. Whoops. So if it either goes over D or D, that's what you get when you copy paste code. There we go. Does look pretty festive. So we could now say, let's make a background and a foreground class or something like that. And have some of the snowflakes be in the background, have some of them be in the foreground. In fact, let's do that. I just want to see how it looks. It shouldn't be too difficult. Add a new file called foreground. It's going to be a normal game object. It's not a sprite in and of itself, it's just a container for other sprites, or snowflakes in this case. And instead of having the snowflake determine its own scale, maybe we pass in a minimum and maximum scale. So we can determine it to be between certain boundaries, and have the ones in the background be smaller than the ones in the foreground. So scale min, minimum, and float scale maximum. Save those as well. Float. Private. Oops. Scale maximum. By the way, if you're looking for a way to organize your properties, what I always do is just put them in alphabetical order. Nothing more difficult than that, just alphabetical order. Because I used to do it based on importance or position in the code, or I had all these rules, but later on I just figured, why bother? Because in the end, it's only for the person programming. And I think the easiest way to figure out where something is by just looking at the position in alphabetical order. So we'll save these, skill minimum and skill maximum with the underscore, and we'll be using that when we're generating a skill, instead of just picking our own. There. Now the compiler will complain that you can't make a snowflake like this, but in the background they should be smaller now. So let's have them something between 0.08 and 0.16. Really small. See how that looks. Well, it looks fine for a background layer. Yeah, they all do kind of look similarly sized, so maybe up this a little bit to have a little bit more variety. Too much. I'll split the difference and put it on 24. Now for the foreground, we're gonna basically do the same thing. I'm gonna create a bunch of sprites, probably not 200 this time, because that would mean there's a total of 400 sprites on the screen, and that might be a little bit too much for this. In fact, I'll lower this a bit as well. But have these be a lot bigger. Let's say between 0.64 and 1.28. I like powers of 2. It's fine, 100 sprites is still enough. So we add the background first, then the player, and then the foreground. Equals new foreground. I'll just keep typing even though it's crashing. Ah, it worked. So background first, then player, then foreground. So the other sprites should be in front of the player. There they are. Should probably lower the speed a little bit. But they are going in front of the player. Alright, in fact I'm going to do two things. I'm going to lower the speed of all of them quite a bit instead of having it be scale dependent. Put it on 4. And the foreground doesn't need this many sprites. It's way too much. Maybe 1/3 of what we have. That's better. Creates a little bit of an illusion of depth. But to go even further with that illusion, let's add a simple level. See if I have a tile anywhere. I do. I have a bunch of them. This one, just this normal ground texture. Or maybe even better, this wall texture. Oh, I'll grab all of them. Ground, wall, and crate. You can always remove them later. Put these all in the bin directory. I'll leave this here, nice and Christmassy. Feel free to stop me if I'm going too fast or something. Whoops. Let's not play this music. It's a little bit too much. This could work. I'm gonna add a row of tiles. Right in the middle of the screen-ish. Maybe even more. Yeah, let's start there. 20. Sprite equals New sprite. I think it was called ground.png. I'm gonna place it. The x is index times its own width. So it'll start at the beginning at the left, and it'll add more of them on the right. And the y position equals the half of the screen, somewhere in the middle. And then we add it as a child. However, to make sure that these don't appear in front of the foreground layer, I'm just gonna put it right here. Add the tiles to the level. Yeah. One big row of tiles here, which the player is in behind of. That's probably not what we want. I want the player to be in front of it. Let's move this one down. Now instead of there being 20, I don't know what the actual size is of these tiles. It's 64 by 64. So the width of our game divided by 64 is how many tiles we're going to need for each row. It stops grassing. There we go. So if we do it like this, maybe rename this one to column. Can I rename it? I can. Now that's a useful feature. And let's say 5 rows. Anybody recognize this music? Without looking at the titles. Just 5 times, and instead of this row times sprite height plus the height divided by 2. So it'll start at row 0 and add the half of the height of the screen to it. So it should make 5 rows and just enough columns to fit everything on the screen. There we go. Ah! Should be one bigger. I don't know if you can tell, but there's one small edge off the screen. So I guess it doesn't work out completely like I hoped. I'll add 1 to it. So width divided by 64 plus 1. Now it should fill the entire bottom half of the screen. It does. Neat. And our player's in front of it. Which also kind of makes sense. Let's add a row of walls as well. I'll rename this one ground sprites. And if the row equals 0, so only for the first row, I'm gonna do something similar. Call it the wall sprite. New sprite. Wall.png. I believe it's also 64 by 64, so that should work fine. Dot x equals column times wall sprite width. Wall sprite times equals just height divided by 2. I mean, we can multiply it by the row, but it will always be 0. And we should do this after we've already added the other sprite. because otherwise they'll be placed below the ground sprite, and I think that won't look very nice. But, oh wait, I forgot to. Rookie mistake, forgot to add it as a child. Greetings from New York, Willem. You're back home, eh? Look, we built a nice wall. You can see that the ground is still behind these pieces as well, which is why I wanted to add them second, because they have like a little bit of transparency. Alright, now let's put our player in a more logical position. Start it somewhere near the bottom. Is the height of the game minus 100, just close to the bottom. And have our X value be slapdash in the middle of the screen. Of course, our origin is not set to the middle, so it'll be slightly off. There we are. Nice. I can just walk through these walls. That's kind of weird, isn't it? Now, we've learned to use the uncollision method for these kind of things. But because there's so many snow sprites on the screen, it'll probably be very slow very quickly. But let's see how that works out. Oh, you can see that the smaller snowflakes fall behind the wall, by the way. That looks pretty neat. Of course, you can make multiple layers of different size snowflakes, I think. First, I'm just gonna add an uncollision method to the player and see if that crashes the game immediately or not. Uncollision. Game object, other. Without doing anything else. But by adding this method, the collision checks will happen between all objects. Wow. Still relatively smooth. Maybe because my laptop is... Well, it is starting to whiz a little bit, so it is doing some calculations. Ah, maybe it's fine. So let's see, if the other is... no easy way to check if what we're bumping into is a wall, without making a specific wall class, I guess. So let's do just that. Wall. Which is going to be a simple sprite. Wall.png. So now in the game here, instead of creating a wall sprite here, we'll just be creating a wall. See if I can hack this a little bit so it won't take too long. Just wall. Wall. In fact, this will work because wall inherits from sprite. So we can just say sprite wall, etc, etc, etc. But for consistency's sake, let's just say wall equals new wall. Don't repeat that too often. Alright, so here we can now check if the other is a wall. Assuming we won't crash. If it is, what do we do? Stop movement, I guess. That'd be one way to do it. But first, let's just console the right line. Well, just to see if it works. And a roll wall tile. There we are. Output is open. Well, yes, it seems to work. It seems to work fine. So, I've seen a lot of people try to work in what they're doing in update and combining it what happens with uncollision. But because you're not 100% sure when on-collision happens compared to when update happens, at least you could be, but let's assume it's slightly irrelevant. Instead of using on-collision, you can get all the collisions right here in update by just doing get collisions. It will return an array of game objects, which I'll just call others for now, to be consistent with this. And I'll remove the on-collision method. What this does is it gets all the objects that you are colliding with currently, that your sprite is overlapping with. If I go to the definition of this, it'll say get game object collisions, and it will pass in this, meaning the current object. So it will only check for you and not check all the objects with all the other objects. So, which is already a lot better. Like, performance will increase significantly because of that. And here we can basically do a for each loop and iterate over all the objects that are here. Check if one of them is a wall, and if so, maybe we can't do movement. That's the most straightforward way of checking. It's not perfect, as I will show you. In others, if other is wall, just return. So this will only happen if we're not overlapping with a wall. Which, as you might see, is not the most perfect example, because I think as soon as we start overlapping with a wall, I'm not able to control it anymore. Nope, there we go. There's a little bit of white screen around, or white space around my character, a little bit of transparency. But yeah, I started overlapping with a wall and now I can't control it anymore. Because every time the update function gets called, I'm still overlapping. So instead, I'm going to, instead of using the move function and immediately moving, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to make a new private method. Oops. Void try move. Float x delta, float y delta. How much do I want to move over x? How much do I want to move over y? And I'll replace all of these with try move instead of normal move. Try move, try move, try move. This whole part I'll move over here. So I know how much I want to move over the x, I know how much I want to move over the y. If you recall, everything that you do within the update function won't be visible unless the function ends and it will be rendered to the screen. So what you could do here is just move your x a little bit over the x delta, move your y a little bit over the y delta, and then get the collisions. See if there's any collision right here. And if there is, like for example a wall, we move it back. Y delta. So that we're not colliding anymore. So in this case, if you're not colliding with any walls, which might very well happen, that just means that we can make the move. But if we are colliding, we'll prevent that move from happening. You'll see, oh, there I go, a little bit jittery. But at least I can go through my wall and I can still keep moving. We'll up my movement speed a little bit because this is slightly too slow. Let's go up to 265. Still fine. Still can't go through the wall, but look at that nice jitter. Alright. So instead of moving back the entire x delta and y delta, maybe we can move back only as much as is needed. Yeah, because now the only way we're colliding with it is because our player has been is always below them. So we know that the player is coming from the bottom of the wall, basically. So it's always moving upwards when it's colliding with them. If there were all walls on the left and right side, we had to take care of that as well. But for now, there seems to be only walls above the player. So we know for a fact that when we're colliding with the wall, that we must be coming from below. So instead of moving the Y back the entirety of the movement, maybe we can reset it. Instead of, we know which object we're colliding with, the other, namely the other one, and we know that it's a wall. So instead of moving it back, let's set it to what it could be at maximum without colliding with the wall, which should be the other object's X position. Don't crash. X minus the other, or plus, no plus, sorry, plus the other's height. Ah, look at that, Visual Studio already knows that you'll have to cast it to a wall in order to access its height. I wanted to show you that it didn't work, but it didn't allow me. But yeah, it's right. So, using the method I just found out existed, we can also do it like this. I just put the variable behind it, so if it's a wall, then this variable will be that other one as a wall, saving us a step. So instead of moving backwards over the entire Y delta, we move back to wherever the wall ends. The wall begins at the top left, and the bottom of the wall is somewhere at its top left plus its height. So the X will still move back a little bit, but it shouldn't jitter anymore. Tink, tink, tink. No, something else is going wrong. It does move back, but it seems to move back too much. Into programming. How does the game know what X delta and Y delta are? X delta and Y delta are the floats that I pass into the try move method right here. And similar to the move method, which is part of the engine, which moves the object based on its current rotation over the X-axis and over the Y-axis. But I've replaced all those methods with the try move method, which means that I'll move this amount, whatever this is, over the X-axis, and this amount, 0, over the Y-axis. So here, the try move float X delta will be whatever you pass into the method here. For example, if we press the W key, that means that we'll move 0 over the X-axis in the try move method, so the X delta will be 0, and we'll move minus our speed times delta time in seconds to over the Y-axis, so slightly downwards. So these are values that I've introduced. The game doesn't know them inherently. They're basically small calculations I do every time a button is pressed. I also see, by the way, what went wrong with the Y position. For some reason I used wall.x instead of wall.y, which would explain why we're moving down a weird amount of pixels. No worries. Yeah, see, now it makes more sense. Like, it just stops moving as soon as we hit it from the bottom, which is kind of what we want. It's annoying that the window keeps spawning over my editor. Yeah, no jittering. And over the X value it doesn't matter anymore. But this looks way more fluid than it does without moving it back. Of course, this only works like this because we know for a fact from which direction we're coming. If we also want to do this for, let's say, a wall on our left side, we have to do that for the X value. Right now, let me check what the transparency is of this sprite actually. Yeah, there seems, I don't know if you can see, but there is a transparent border around the sprite. If you want to fix this easily, I guess just cut off everything that's not necessary from the sprite. Something like this. Luckily there's an editor built into Mac to do this, because otherwise I had to open Photoshop and stuff. Yeah. This seems to make it as tight as possible. Yeah. For now, yeah, that's the easiest way to solve it. However, I'm not sure if it's next lecture or the one after that. I'll show you how you can use a collider, meaning that you don't, but now automatically it creates a collider for you that is the size of the sprite, just to get people started more easily. But later on, you'll be able to create your own colliders, and having them be smaller or larger depending on what you need. So you could have a collider that, just to use this as an indication, is only the bottom of the player. So you want the head to be able to go in front of certain objects, but you don't want it to be able to move his body. In this case, this would actually make perfect sense, because you can stand in front of the wall slightly better than. Right now it stops because its head, its hat really actually is in front of the wall. But if we were to check only from the waist down, basically, from here, or from the neck down from here, it would make more sense, because the player could stand up until, yeah, it looks more like he's actually standing in front of the wall. Right now it all kind of looks a little bit flat. There. You could already kind of fix it by, let me just save this player sprite and replace it with something without any white space. So if I were to run it again, I can get a little bit closer to the wall. You could already kind of fix this by, oh, there's also a white space around the stupid wall. So there was double white space keeping it back. By having the player be two separate objects, basically having him have a head and having him have a body, and only check for collisions with the body and don't check the head. In fact, maybe we can actually do that. Because we're a sprite, maybe I can just cut up the player, it sounds more rough than it is, into two separate sprites. The bottom part and the top part. I'll just cut off the bottom. Make a new one with just that. I'll just call it torso, feet, something not super sketchy. I'll just call it player bottom. Put that in there. And the other half here. Call that player top. Now let's see. Instead of the player being the player, we'll let the player be the player bottom. Let's see how creepy that looks. Oh, did I put him in the wrong directory? I did put him in the wrong directory. File name not found. Yeah. Where were we saying? Okay, now it should be good. So now it's just the bottom. But it already, no, this is kind of creepy, but it does make more sense like this. So you can see like it stops moving as soon as basically your behind would run into the wall. Of course, you also kind of want to head. So the player top, I'll just add it as a separate sprite. Sprite. Let's call it player top equals a new sprite player top dot png, and add that as a child. But then it adds it straight on top of us. Let's see, that'll look pretty weird, I guess. Yeah, it'll add it straight on top. So it has to move up a little bit, and I think it has to move up. Let me check the size. 64 by 35. 46 by 35 even. So player top dot y equals, what did I say? 35. Minus 35. Move it up. See? This already makes it a lot more realistic. So now we're actually standing in front of the wall. Why not use the height property of the sprite? You mean for calculating the position? That is actually a very good idea. I didn't even think of that. Yeah, because there's no white space anymore. You can just do it like this. Player top.height. And because we added as a child to the player sprite, it means it will automatically move with the player sprite. We don't have to keep track of them individually. Yeah, there we go. And now, well, this looks better, I think. Yeah. In fact, what you often see happen is that there's a bit of a composite pattern going on, meaning that an object is just a game object, and it contains a sprite for the top and it contains a sprite for the bottom, but it itself is not a sprite. Or it itself is a sprite, but the sprite is completely invisible, so you can use it as a hitbox. Which C# version is supported? 7+ for sure. I think it's, I'm not sure where I can check which one I'm using right now. But like the thingy I'm doing here with the other equals or other is wall, that is C# 7 and up. So it's at least C# 7. Not 100% sure which one this is running on right now. It's running on Mono 5.16. Yeah, not sure. I can't check easily. On Mac it's different because it uses Mono. It uses Mono for the runtime, and it uses the C# syntax of 7 or up. But it's hard for me to tell. This works quite well. But like I said, it's pretty common to not have the player be a sprite in and of itself. Though in this case, it's fine. But we could also change this a little bit. So I'll have the player bottom be the sprite itself, because that makes for a perfect hitbox for this guy. But I'll set the alpha of myself to 0. I'm not sure if this actually propagates to your children. Let's do a quick check. No, so just the bottom is invisible, but it's still there. But now it's invisible, still there, but and so it still functions as a hitbox. If I make it slightly visible, only half, you'll see that you'll see exactly what I'm doing. See, the bottom half is still there, just doesn't show up anymore. So with that logic, I can also, instead of just adding a player top, I can just add a player bottom as well, on top of myself, and I'll make myself invisible. So I'll use the same sprite and place it on top, but you'll soon see why. add this first or add the player first? No, I'll add this first, player bottom. And I'll set my own alpha to 0 again. There we go. So it looks like nothing has changed. But something very important has changed, because now we have control over the order of which these sprites are layered on top of each other. So if, for example, I'll use the snowflake sprite to show how this works. We created something that's below the player. Sprite equals new sprite. I'll call this sprite shadow equals new sprite snowflake.png. Add that as a child. And move it down a little bit. Probably the same as the player bottom's height. Or maybe the half of the player bottom. So I'll add that first. I'll change its position over the y-axis to minus the player bottom.height. So halfway through, like this, halfway through the player bottom. Man, if you say this too often. Correct order. Let's see how this looks. Oh yeah, you can see the small snow sprite here moving with the player. I'll change some stuff around. First, I'll scale it. No, I won't scale it for now. I'll just set the origin to the width divided by 2 and the height divided by 2. So in the middle. So it'll be under the player's feet. Because I add it first, and then I add the player bottom, and then I add the player top, it'll be behind the player, like this. Nice. Let's also set our own origin. No, for now actually it's fine. It's just to illustrate a point. So, sprites have multiple properties that you can use quite easily for stuff like this. For example, the sprite has a color as well that you can use. And the colors are hexadecimal, which you've probably seen. So FF9900, which I happen to know is orange, full on red, 99 green, and 0 blue. Isn't it a better choice to keep the rendering, the collision detection, and the player mechanics separate? Yes. Yes, it is. If you're building a complex structure, definitely keep it... oh, this looks kind of disgusting. You should definitely keep it separated. But I think, especially in this course, it's important to be result-oriented. You'll have a certain goal for your game, and like this, my player works, it functions correctly, it walks around nicely, it doesn't go through walls, and it's all in this one class. As long as these classes remain relatively small, I don't have a problem with the functionality not being separated. It's more about learning how to use these methods to your advantage. First, I'm just gonna change the color to black instead of orange, because now it looks like he had an accident. Could also make it red to make it seem like he's bleeding. Right, this looks more shadowy. Still, the position is kind of weird. The position over the y-axis is okay. Position over the x-axis could go a little to the left. Equals player bottom dot width divided by 2. So somewhere in the middle. Oh, to the left, so I should have done a minus. Yeah, now it's even. Now it looks like he's flying. That looks like he's floating slightly above the ground. That's what you get when you try to program too quickly. Better, it still looks like he's floating because it's not in the middle. You can see how easy it is to create an illusion of depth. Because it seems like he's just flying in midair a little bit. Just by putting a little spot behind him. This could be a fun mechanic if this were like a spaceship kind of deal and he's just flying a little bit above the ground. Is this more in the middle? I guess it's because the origin of the shadow is not in the middle. There we go. Better, better. Still a little bit too high. Still looks like he's levitating. Ah, even more. Shit. Yeah, still levitating. Looks kind of creepy almost. Especially with the eerie snow in the background. Yeah. Though, if this were a an oblique platformer, oblique as in the... Yeah, just strap on a jetpack. Done. Then this makes sense. You just needed to have him hover up and down a little bit. In fact, I think if you make it hover up and down a little bit, this actually looks quite alright. That's just, I mean, while we're here. Time passed. I do need a reference to these objects then. Player top, private sprite, player bottom, private sprite, player top. Add an underscore, remove this, so now it's a property. Add an underscore, like that. I think the shadow as well. Private, sprite, shadow. This session has a bit of an improvisational feel to it, doesn't it? Let's go with whatever seems fun. Shadow. Put these all here. Then in the update methods. It really is though. You can think of fun mechanics by just messing around, see what happens. I think there's a... I've recently found an article with a bunch of examples of games that were basically had some mechanics born out of accident or the entire game born out of an accident. In fact, I think one of the examples was how the GTA 2, how aggressive the cops were. They didn't used to be. They used to be pretty mellow. But then, I think somebody on the dev team changed something and made them hyper aggressive, and people thought it was so funny that just kept it in. Because the cops, they will ram you off the road with no regard for their own safety. Just try to do everything they could to just try and kill you. Which was really funny. First time pass needs to actually increase over time. Just gonna keep typing and hope it stops crashing. There we go. So then we move the Y method up and down a little bit. Let's see if first we just do this over the player bottom. That's a little bit too much. That's a little bit way too much. Let's do it. 2% of that. A little more, 8%. Seeing as you're using C#7, why not make the private variables auto properties with only a getter? Yeah, you could do that. You could do that. But I do think if you're comfortable with that, you're allowed to do that. If you want to access them outside of these, or I'm just gonna don't put that on my tombstone. Yeah, if you're comfortable with that, using auto properties with only a getter, definitely do that. I do think even like I could give you extra points for doing stuff like that, because it shows you have an understanding of the C# language. But I don't think it's the easiest to learn. For learning, it's just fine to use these properties as if they're just privates and publics and all the stuff that you need from a basic level. But if you're fine with using them as such and you know how to use them correctly, definitely do that, because I think it'll score you some points during the assessment. Just gonna keep typing until it stops crashing. Yeah, well, I'll brute force my way through this. Player bottom, player top. I'll have them move up and down together a little bit. This actually works pretty well. Yeah, it does look like it's levitating now. I'll just float over here. If I want to up the speed, I can just multiply the delta time a little bit. Because now it goes per second, but if I can just make it go twice as fast by doing it like this. And it'll float slightly faster. Change the L5 shadow as well so it looks even more real. That's a good idea. Just gonna make the levitation a little bit more. I think that's a very good idea. In fact, maybe we let it be dependent on how close the player is to the ground, or something like that. First, let's see if this isn't too extreme. This looks pretty realistic, like some sort of psychic just floating above the ground. And I'll have the shadow dot scale be dependent on this as well. So it'll be between 1 and -1. How would that look? I guess it'll invert at some point. Might have to absolute and multiply this a little bit. Or, no, I'll just have it depend on the bottom's Y position. Times 10. So it should grow and fade a little bit. That's too much. Oh, that's that's not what it's meant to do. This looks like he's like shooting a rocket or something. Yeah, alright, maybe that's a little bit too much. I'll just leave this. But I do think it's a good suggestion to make the alpha of the shadow lower, maybe 0.32 or something. Resharper as a student license will help you keep your code cleaner. Yes, very much so. I'm a big fan of everything JetBrains makes. They made Resharper, they made Writer, which is an editor for C# that includes... this does look better, the shadow. They make an editor that includes C#, Resharper inside of it. However, Writer had some problems running the GXPEngine because it couldn't find the packages we require, like the OpenGL connection package. But however, I did get it to work at some point, but I kind of forgot how I did it. It has to do with how you link your binaries, how you link the libraries. And yeah, keeping StyleCup, I've never heard of it, but it sounds cool. It's apparently a package that you can install and it keeps your code clean. Right now I just format based on layout. Rider definitely has a few bugs, but I've been using it for Unity development for over a year or so now. Little less than a year, but still. Even with the bugs, I like it better than Visual Studio Community, which seems to be crashing every 10 minutes or so for me. Ah, you're right, the origin needs to be set in the middle. That's why it was scaling so weirdly. Still, that's something for another time. I think this looks pretty neat. Plus the collisions being with the bottom part means that we can't float over the wall, which makes sense. I didn't think it would look like it was floating this much. But yeah, I can't go further than this. Because if I make my own alpha uninvisible again, you can see where the actual collision detection happens. So you can see my back floating slightly behind the player sprite. That's where the collisions actually happen. The rest is just faked. But that's a good way of doing it. Style Comp enforces the default C# style, and if you configure it well, it prevents you from compiling your code if it's not up to standards. That's pretty hardcore. Though I do think that's a good thing, especially if you're working in a project that doesn't really have a very strict deadline. If you're doing a game jam, whatever. But if you're working in a project, yeah, you can definitely say like either your code has to be the correct styling, or you won't be able to use it. Ah, music is over, which probably also indicates that my time is pretty much up. You used it during game jams. That's hardcore. I don't know if I would. I mean, I try to keep myself as much using the code conventions as much as possible, but after a while, it does get a little tedious when, especially working with a team that doesn't have too much experience. By the way, have people signed up for the game jam in January? Because I've signed up. I'm not 100% sure with whom I'll be working. Probably my musical friend and an artist, and see if we can make a simple game in 2 days. But if you haven't signed up, I would highly recommend you do. I think you can sign up for another 2 weeks or so, because it does. Let me check real quick. It's not too far in the future anymore. It's in a few weeks. Global game jam. Utrecht is full. Oh yeah, stuff is selling out. It seems €15, blah 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 blah. I have to get a ticket via Eventbrite. It's on the 26th of January. You can't sign up anymore? That's weird. Oh, but then you can go to this one. Oh, it links to the 2018 one instead of the 2019 one. Are people not from the study allowed to join? Yes, they are, actually. You just have to get the ticket for them. They have to register. But if you buy a ticket, you also get pizza and a lot of snacks and drinks and such. Oh yeah, the price is slightly higher now. I guess Eventbrite charges a little bit of money for it. $16.92. That's still reasonable. You also get 1 or 2 pizzas and a bunch of stuff. Of course, power and internet. And a place to sleep. Well, you have to bring your own sleeping bags and whatnot. But you do get a location within one of the classrooms where you can put your stuff down. Provided it's not on fire. Oh, it also says you can get a refund of all your money up until 7 days before the event starts. So that's pretty good. In fact, so if you decide not to go or something. Is there a public Git repository of the GXPEngine? There is a Git repository, but for now only teachers have access to it. But as soon as Paul has finished implementing the stuff he wants to implement, I've already finished most of my stuff, we'll open it up. But the only reason why there isn't a public repository yet is because we use fmod for audio, and fmod has a very strict license. So one of the things that Paul was planning on doing was switching it to OpenAL or some other audio related framework that is actually free and open. And as soon as we've done that, we'll be able to open source it, because then it doesn't matter anymore. But if we open source it now, fmod can do nasty stuff to us, which is not worth it. They throw a lot of money around trying to get people to stop open sourcing their stuff. They'll sue us. Yes, we will. That's one of the goals, that we allow pull requests, because there is, of course, it's still a learning tool. It's not a full-fledged engine, but there's a bunch of stuff in the GXPEngine already that is made by students. Like, for example, the input.getKey was already there, but then a student made the input.getKey down and getKey up, and the get mouse down and get mouse up, and we liked it so much that we included it in the engine. But it would be better if we allow pull requests to a repository, so we can just go over it. But it's still a learning tool. So if, for example, I know Slavi doesn't like the x and y variable that we use instead of a position vector. But for now, the x and y value are more obvious. From an educational perspective, it's more easy to use x and y. And then later on, during the physics course, introduce vectors and positions like that. So I guess educationally speaking, that's fine. But if you have any suggestions on how the engine could improve, or if you want to make your own improvements that don't break the educational value of it, we'll happily include them, because we're kind of doing these improvements in our own time. Especially Paul, he's been working really hard on this. We don't really have time during the week to work on this, so it's just weekends and game jams that we work on the engine to make it more fun for people to use and fix bugs. This version of the GXPEngine has a lot of bug fixes in it. No more memory leaks, no more canvas drawings that do weird stuff every time you update it without deleting it and such. Alright, I think I have to call it quits with my little floaty guy hovering behind a wall. You're welcome. Yeah, you guys have nice holidays as well. It's coming up. I'm contemplating doing a Christmas stream. Well, after Christmas, the Thursday after Christmas. But I'll see how much time I have. And I'll have to think of a nice subject to do. This one was a bit more all over the place because the collisions thing is easy to do. It's just something you still have to get used to. Hopefully during the vacation you guys can get some work done and understand how these collisions work and such. And then if you have any questions, email them to me. And if I have one or two subjects to cover during the next one, it could be fine. What's this link? Thanks. Thanks. Oh, I love that. Updating the engine as a Christmas stream. That actually, there are some improvements that I want to make to it. I've the previous iteration of this engine I used for the stream, but it kept on crashing, which is why I downloaded a new one. Had some improvements that I used specifically for streaming, like it kept a more secure frame update, and it spawned outside of my window, like I could place it somewhere. So the width and the height of the window, plus the X and Y position of the window on your screen, so it doesn't always appear in front of my IDE, which is annoying when you're streaming. Maybe. I have some pull requests laying around that I want to integrate into the engine as well, and I have to do quality checks. So maybe. Or I can do a Unity stream. But that might be a little bit too advanced for most people now, so might stick to the GXPEngine. But like I said, if you have any suggestions, feel free to email them to me. My email is on Blackboard if you guys don't know what it is. Boy, this guy's floating all over the place. It does work pretty well. I think if you make this into like a sort of a hovercraft or like a spaceship flying above the ground, having the shadow be somewhat below it, that does create like a nice illusion of depth. Yes, it is very powerful. Most games I start off making some of the tools that I'll be using during the game. I'll just make some editor scripts that allow me to do development way faster. But I might save that for the streams that I'll give during the Unity course, which is in 1.5 quartile. Pretty quick. Little wait, but I also have to figure out what I'll be teaching there. Because you might not know it yet, but the Unity course has been updated. It's now more aimed towards implementing functionality and not as much aimed towards basically making the structure really solid, because the engineers should at that point already kind of know how to make a solid structure, so they'll just learn about how to use the engine. And the designers will also follow that course, and for them it'll be slightly more complex because they haven't had much programming since the initial programming course and input-output, I guess. So the Unity will have a different focus than it has in previous years. But maybe then I can use the streams to go more in depth on Unity specific design patterns and such. Because I think I've created a library of like 200-ish classes that I immediately import into my Unity project every time I start one. I would give you access, but we're using Bitbucket and there's already 5 people that have access to it, so we'll have to pay for access to it. But I could, if you send me an email, I'll send you the latest version of the engine. And you can see what we're working with right now if you want to make any improvements. Because I'll happily take any improvements. So if you want to upgrade it, I can send you the version that we're working with right now. That I'm working with right now. This is the latest version. It's even newer than the one on Blackboard, though. There's not much difference visually. Oh yeah, there's definitely some room for it. And then yeah, maybe you can keep track of it in a local Git repository and send a zip including the entire local Git repository back, because then I can just include it. Alright, it's getting late. Oh, you don't have a Suction account anymore. I'll type it in the chat. I don't know if it gets spammed or not. r.g.tom@Suction. It would be cool to have an entity component system to GXP. In fact, I've made one for the platformer engine that the designer students were using last year. I do think it's too much for early projects though. The students that are just starting out, trying to explain an entity component system without really fully grasping what object-oriented thinking is might be a little bit too much. Though it is cool, like entity component systems, especially with this stuff like all these snowflakes. It would increase performance drastically, I think. So it would be cool, but I don't think it's a good tool to introduce now. But feel free to try and make it. Spatial OS, I've heard of the name. Let me do a quick Google. Oh yes, I've heard of this. I haven't used it though. It's the multiplayer engine, right? Oh, it looks pretty cool. Bit of a... That does look pretty nice. I'm assuming it's pretty expensive. Yeah. Cloud-based, flexible. It's similar to Lumberyard, I guess, to what Amazon is pushing. Yeah, networking is easy. You'll find out. It's a second-year course now, though, so people won't have to worry about it for now. Networking, at the time they get networking now, it should be slightly more doable. Instead of at the end of the first year, it should be somewhere in the second year. But it's still not an easy course now. But they're more prepared. One room, an entire continent, 1 million players in the same world. That's insane. So that's like even more massive MMORPG. Like even massiver multiplayer online role-playing games. That is insanely big. I'm assuming it does what the name implies and kind of automatically divides itself up into smaller sections that it keeps in sync. Like every player has probably a sort of radius around it that has all the positions of nearby players in it, but doesn't include everything else. Yeah, an extra MMORPG. But I assume it only updates players of the positions of stuff that is nearby, because I don't think it will be able to stream like this massive amount of data, which is how World of Warcraft kind of used to work initially, but they changed it pretty quickly, luckily. All right, I gotta run. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and I'll post another thing on Blackboard and Facebook if I'll do another stream next week. I'm contemplating it, probably, but I'll see if I have time. It is the holidays. I gotta spend some time with friends and family, I guess. Yeah, it's a massive drain on data usage. Right, see y'all later. Bye bye. Good night. It's so late.